Hi, everybody. Welcome to the end of my first long Thursday of this semester. I couldn't be more tired or more energized. God, I love graduate students. This semester, I'm guiding graduate students through a course on Austen and games. And today was kind of the taster teaser in many ways. Here at Auburn, graduate courses run about 3 hours long, so we usually take a break in the middle, so it's natural to divide a class roughly in half. And so the first half of class I set aside for the same where do you know from assignment that I do with all of my classes. For those of you who haven't heard me talk about this before, this is adapted from my colleague Eugenia Zorowski, who in turn is deriving her formulation from learning and knowing alongside both folks who draw from indigenous ways of knowing, as well as the long and rich history of the Black feminist tradition. It's a way of situating all of us and honoring the knowledge that we bring into the classroom space as we try to learn more together in community. It's worth taking the first half of class to do it, quite frankly. And it's a little bit jumbo sized by virtue of graduate students. This is a class that has folks from many different pathways, although all nominally within English. To give you context, Auburn University's English department at the graduate level offers tracks in creative writing, literature, as well as our master's in technical and professional communication and our tracks in rhetoric and composition. And we have a good representation of just about all of those tracks in our class, as well as several students from our education college who are pursuing different variations of the Master's in English Education, which of course requires further coursework in literature at the graduate level. We don't offer that many courses in literature in any given semester. And in fact, I only get to teach a graduate course every other year for this reason. So we make these things count. So that's a way of situating our knowledge and who's in the room without me divulging any particular details of the first 90 minutes of class. But it was eye-opening and generative. It's also worth saying that, like my undergraduate course, which I talk about in separate vlog entries, this is a class that has as many people who are coming for Jane Austen as they are coming for gaming. And indeed, there are many folks who are occupying a kind of Venn diagram, either folks who love both of those things or who are interested in one of them but have no background while being very invested in the other. It's also worth noting that this is nominally and officially on the course registry a course in 18th century studies, which instructors can kind of interpret quite broadly. Jane Austen was born in the 18th century and was operating in what we call the long 18th century, which extends from the late 17th century and into about 1830. It's a long story and probably beyond the scope of this particular video. It suffices to say that no one in the room identifies as an 18th centuryist. So part of my job is indeed to communicate information about the actual 18th century. And so the class is structured so that we're doing deep dives into all of the surviving work of Jane Austen, both her published novels, as well as the work she left unpublished at the time of her death. The only thing we're really not touching on in this class is the voluminous amount of correspondence she left behind, which is a shame because that's real bitchy stuff. I digress. After this first week, every class will include one of Austen's novels for the first several weeks of class, one scholarly article that we will pay attention to with care, as well as an experience of play. For the longer novels, Emma and Mansfield Park, we'll dial back quite a bit in terms of secondary material. For the Emma week, it's where we're going to focus on the thing about Austen, one of my favorite informative podcasts about Austen and her world, in particular because it is tightly edited to about 20 to 30 minutes and does a deep and thorough dive on one small aspect of Austen's world tied to a very specific close reading of text. And I don't just say that because they had me on to talk about smelling bottles, but I really do love it. Each week, because we are building to an experience where students are going to create a final portfolio and they will choose either to produce a traditional journal article style seminar paper or do something that's more appropriate to their particular degree program. In the course of English Ed, it may be pedagogical tools for creative writers, it may be portfolio pieces, those sorts of things. In both cases, the tracks are scaffolded with tasks each week that ask them to build towards those final experiences in ways that are roughly equivalent and allow everyone to help each other out. But that's in the weeks to come. For now, each week is larded with 4 additional exploration links. I also do this for the undergrads. Links to the related articles produced by Persuasions Online, the publication of the Jane Austen Society of North America that's peer-reviewed, links to relevant Thing About Austen episodes, which are handily also categorized by text, as well as Broadview's Jane Austen in Context, a digital repository of some really important pieces in the history of Jane Austen scholarship. So while there is a certain amount of guided collective reading and consuming and thinking that we'll do together, students will also have the ability to pick and mix in many ways. I'm really excited about all of this. But so that we don't waste, because we're meeting once a week and we lose a week for fall break, because fall break is Thursday and Friday and our class is on Thursday, so we don't have a class in week 8. We're jumping right in, but not to an Austen novel because I didn't want to freight the first week with that kind of weight. But handily, my friend Abria Iyengar hath provided with A Court of Fae and Flowers, the new and ongoing campaign from Dimension 20. I made my students pay for dropout for the next, well, it'll be 3 months total by the time that the campaign ends because it's 10 episodes long. It's not an insubstantial thing to ask students to do, nor is it something that I know because, of course, it is ongoing. But I did see enough before the start of the semester to know that it's a rich text, both in the ways that it is playing with notions of Austen intentionally and unintentionally, as well as the Regency more broadly. And that's useful no matter what they do with it. And coming next week, you'll be able to read some of my thoughts on what A Court of Fae and Flowers is doing with Austen and 18th century material so far. Stay tuned. So in the back half of class, after everybody got to rest their body minds for 20 minutes, we talked about first impressions. For about half the class, they're not familiar with actual play at all. So part of it was talking about what the experience was like, the ways in which our attention drifts, the power and impact of the visuals. Rick Perry, you were cited and praised. And also talking about what we do and don't know about the system mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons and Good Society by virtue of watching an edited actual play. And so that was another thing that I planted the seeds of today. I brought my copy of the Player's Handbook and my copy of the initial kickstarted volumes of Good Society. I own the whole game in every format it can be owned in. I think it's really neat and I think it's really interesting. And Emily Kugler at Howard and I, who co-owns this channel, have published about the interesting ways in which the Good Society is grappling long before Bridgerton, long before the Sanditon adaptations, long before Mr. Malcolm's List, with these questions of how to make Austen more visibly welcoming to others. And as I argue to my students, and I'll argue in some other places soon, it is this adaptation, A Court of Fay and Flowers, it is by virtue of the fact that they are not playing Good Society straight, but instead taking Good Society mechanics and bringing them into the Forgotten Realms or some Fay equivalent, that allows it to work better than it does in the original form. It doesn't have to step around sticky historical realities or efface them, because they simply don't have to exist in this imagined world in the ways they really do, or their traces linger in the corners of every adaptation that takes place in even an imagined version of our real Regency world. We'll talk in the fullness of time in this semester more about the work that people like Patricia Matthew and Carrie Sinanen and Bianca Hernandez and Amanda Ray Prescott and many other scholars and critics, both in and out of the academy, have communicated these challenges of representation to many different audiences. For now, again, a taster. We will return to A Court of Fay and Flowers. We'll take advantage of the fact that we don't have that fall break week meeting to allow students to have some more time to, play and explore in the middle of the semester before coming back to the full series, also with Austen under our belt, to really see more fully what A Court of Fay and Flowers is doing. But it's a nice place to start. The other thing that I had students take a look at this first week, and that we didn't fully unpack this week, but we will unpack again in the fullness of time, likely on Mansfield Park Week, is the text that I think of as the closest to me being seen as a teacher of Austen by any writer or thinker, and that is, again, Patricia Matthews' piece in The Atlantic on teaching but not loving Jane Austen. I feel much the same way, and dear viewer, I should note that. I come as someone who is a life member of the Jane Austen Society of North America, but who will not attend a JASNA meeting for the foreseeable future. I do not necessarily classify myself as a fan. I have a strange relationship to enthusiasm in terms of all of my objects of study. And nevertheless, I know that Jane Austen puts butts in seats. It gets my articles published. It allows me to function. But what I want Austen to be is not only a rich object of study in the novel's own right, but also a gateway. In this case today, a gateway both to actual plays that I love, a genre that is not familiar to every student, but also, in the fullness of time, a gateway to the 18th century, to the novels that Austen loved, that Austen modeled her own work on, the women writers who came before her and wrote after her. I want to be a hype woman for those things too. And so in this video series, I will also be planting seeds for further reading for you. That's a lot, and I'm really tired. But this is all to say that this was a great start to the semester. Next week, we'll be discussing Austen's first published novel. They were written not in the order in which they came into the world, but we'll be talking about Sense and Sensibility, and we'll be talking about a lasers and feelings hack, also called Sense and Sensibility, that attempts to turn Austen into a one-page mech fight. We'll learn how to read a game as we think about Austen and her novelistic style. And that'll be the rhythm for much of the first half of the semester. I can't tell you how delighted I was by today, even as we are bursting from the seams in our classroom. I say that, and graduate courses are not especially large, but this one is maxed at 15. which is about as big as we can get before it gets real wild. More next week. For now, it's time for me to do a little bit of rest before that other thing that happens on Thursday in just a few hours. Feel free to leave questions in the comments, or you can always contact me on Twitter, where I am highly online at Friede. That's Freed. And I wish you all peace and a good weekend.